I'm Mitch from Beyond the Woods, and in the second video of this series, I'm going to be comparing the sound and the function of the cabinet blocks between Fractal Audio's Quantum firmware number 4 and the Line 6 Helix's firmware number 2. Let's get into it. As a quick disclaimer, I am conducting this comparison with as much fairness as I can. Despite my personal preference between these two units, neither of these companies are paying me or coercing me to make this demo. I have no vested interest in the success or the failure of either of these products or either of these companies, and I'm making the series with the true intention of informing people's purchase decisions. I'm trying my best to support any opinions that I give with effective evidence, and if I'm not doing a very good job at that, then you can yell at me in the comments, I guess. So let's get started. I think the most important difference between Fractal and the Helix, even above their huge user interface differences, is their approach to the cabinet block, which is something that may not seem like that big of a deal, but I am personally of the belief that the cabinet impulse you use is responsible for the vast majority of your tone. So this is a big deal for me. Let me break down the two different philosophies that these companies have around cabinets. If you're coming from using another modeler like a Pod, an 11 rack, even software modelers like Bias, Amplitude, or Guitar Rig, the Helix will have a cabinet block that is familiar to you. You choose your cab, you choose your mic, you choose your distance, and you're set. It's sort of like a basic simulation of having the cabinet in front of you. I'm sure you're already familiar with this sort of thing. Fractal has moved in a different direction by baking in their microphone models into the cabinets. So when you select the cabinet impulse from the list, it is already tastefully mic'd up for you. Some of them were mic'd up using a neutral reference microphone, something that most people don't typically use on a guitar cab, but actually, those don't sound extremely weird compared to the standard mics. I'll show that during the comparison. Regardless of whether they were captured with an actual neutral reference microphone or not, Cliff from Fractal says that he tries to include impulses that are as neutral as possible, not too dark or too bright. Originally, this was done because people often applied an impulse response of a microphone on top of the speaker impulse, but this has quickly fallen out of style, and the microphone parameter isn't even included in the AX8 anymore. Of course, if you want to include a drastic EQ curve like that, you can dial that in with an EQ or just switch to a different impulse. The baking in of the microphone is actually very helpful to Fractal, since this allows them to have both the user imported impulses to be in the same list to be directly compared and categorized with the stock ones. The Helix, on the other hand, has separate blocks in the chain for their stock cabs and the user imported cabs. I'll talk more about importing your own impulses later in this video. 179 stock impulses on the AX8 compared to 30 cabs times 16 mics gives you 480 hypothetical combinations on the Helix. So, unlike amp models, the Helix actually wins for selection here. But I'll talk more about that later. Both units model the proximity effect in some way, the Helix with its distance control and the Fractal with its dedicated proximity effect parameter. I'm not going to be messing with those today. With the Helix, I've set every impulse to be at a distance of 1 inch away to model close miking, and that maximizes low end response. While with the Fractal, it doesn't really make sense to use that parameter since the proximity effect of those microphones is already baked into the impulse anyway. So that model, or that parameter, is sort of there just for people who are used to using it in the past. I'm also not going to be digging into digital fidelity differences of ultra-res and stuff like that. I'm not extremely well versed in that regard. I'm sort of just focusing on tone for this. There are plenty of standard resolution cabs in the Fractal that sound phenomenal to me, but I am including whether each Fractal cab is either ultra-res or standard res on screen while they're playing, so if you want to see if you can notice a difference, you can do that. If you watch part 1, you know that the amp models between these two units actually aren't too different from each other, so I'm taking advantage of that. I have 3 patches on both units dialed in to sound as similar as I can possibly make them. One for clean, one for like classic rock, sort of bluesy distortion, and then one for hard rock and metal. Chose the 800 because it's middle of the road amp that definitely specializes at like mid-gain rock sort of stuff, but you can push it into metal territory, and it also cleans up pretty well. And also the JCM 800 just sounds similar between these two, or their individual JCM 800 blocks between these two units actually sound very similar to each other, so it wasn't too tough to try and make them sound identical. So to show you how they sound, here they are running through the same cabinet impulse in my DAW. I'm running reamp guitar tracks, so they're both receiving the same performance. And just to be clear, this is not part of the cabinet comparison. This is to show you what I will be feeding the cabinets later on in the demo. Even if you hear some differences, I think that they're close enough to start comparing their cabinets, and you can take into account any differences you heard going through that cabinet and apply it to the cabinets you hear going through these. Some of these are going to be direct head-to-head comparisons, like how the Helix attempts an SM57 on a deluxe reverb cab versus an Impulse on the Fractal that attempts the same sort of thing. However, since the Fractal does not give you the same microphone selection for every single cabinet block like the Helix does, I'm doing some comparisons that aren't really directly to each other. However, the point of the section is for you to listen to everything and build sort of like a general idea of what each unit sounds like. It's the best I can do with the two different approaches that these two units have for their cabinet blocks. So let's get started. My personal preference here is towards the Fractal. If you listen to the comparison and honestly prefer the Helix, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, because they really are just different from each other, very different. John Brown from Monuments, who's probably my favorite guitar player, fully acknowledges that the Helix sounds harsher than the Fractal, but he likes that about it. He thinks the Fractal is too smooth, and I mean, you can't really argue with his results. I'm not saying I hate every single impulse on the Helix either. I actually quite like the deluxe reverb and the bassman impulses, but I prefer Fractal most of the time, especially as gain increases. Things tend to get very harsh and very buzzy on the Helix. I can say with a very high level of certainty that the mics on the Helix cabs are not actually the microphones capturing the speakers in question. I believe that they are impulse responses of the microphones that they're talking about applied to a neutral reference microphone's capture of that speaker cabinet. The reason I say this, my gut is telling me this. I asked the Helix forum about this. Nobody really knows the clear answer. My gut feeling is that they wouldn't include impulses of an AKG D12 and an AKG D112. Those are mics that are basically only used on kick drums and bass in real life. Nobody really ever uses those on guitar cabinets, and it would be kind of ridiculous for them to shoot, you know, so many impulses of those mics on guitar cabinets when they won't be used that much. That's why I'm thinking that they actually just applied impulse responses of those microphones to a neutral reference microphone's capture of the cabinet just because they can. Because they had the responses there, they were going to use them for bass anyway, so they might as well include them on the guitar cabinets. If I'm correct in this assumption, it would not surprise me that the Helix does not impress me when it comes to the stock cabinet impulses, especially when it comes to high gain. If you've ever mic'd up a real cab, if you've ever taken impulses, you know how much difference can be made by even slight horizontal movements on the speaker. And that makes a world of difference when it comes to brightness. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of Helix users that can say, or that will say, you can just high cut that out. But no, you can't. Like, there is no substitute for effective microphone placement when it comes to overbearing brightness. There's only so far you can go in polishing a turd. Again, if you've ever taken cabinet impulses, if you've ever mic'd up a real amp, you know there's usually a sweet spot. A particular mic, a particular set of mics in particular positions that capture the speaker in the most pleasing way. Or even if there isn't just one sweet spot, there's usually just 2 or 3 that you keep on going back to. We pick favorites. It's kind of just in our nature. And Fractal understands that. And I get it. It's really weird to kind of place that into someone else's hands and trust that someone else knows what the sweet spot is. But at the same time, this makes things a whole lot easier, and if you don't agree with that sweet spot, you can just switch to another cabinet or try to EQ that out. So yes, the Helix does have many more options when it comes to cabinets, but I prefer the Fractal here. And I know someone's probably going to say, but in the first episode you said Fractal had a whole bunch more options and you preferred it, so you're just a stupid Fractal fanboy. No, this is totally different. In the first episode, I established that amp model quality between these two units is about on par, so at that point, I could take into consideration how many more options the Fractal had available. In this case, I believe that the cabinets on the Helix, even though there are many more of them, they aren't voiced in as pleasing of a way, and they often turn out harsh and buzzy under high gain. So under this consideration, I don't care how many cabinets there are in there, I prefer the Fractal. This is a totally different ballgame from the amp models, but I know there are going to be plenty of people that try and snowball amp and cab into one, but that's just not the case, and it's not fair to either unit. Give credit where credit is due, and give criticism where criticism is due. I'm tired of loyal fans of both companies acting like things are black and white. What worries me most is that people will listen to the Helix and not like it and blame the amp models, when the likely culprit is probably the stock cabinet impulses, and that is something that can be worked around. You can import your own impulses, or you can run into a neutral power amp and into an actual cabinet, as people have been doing for years now with amp modelers. But when it comes to loading in your own impulses, the Fractal makes you jump through way too many hoops, especially compared to the Helix. Alright, so to import impulses into the Helix, it is super duper simple. You see, you have the preset list up here, switch over to impulses, currently have it totally empty right now. Go to your files, your WAV files, select as many as you'd like, just drag and drop, and there they are importing. I put it in slot 2 starting, but I mean, you can go into slot 1. And then, well, it's importing now, I can't show you yet, but of course, since they're over there, they don't let you access the impulses through the cabinet block. These are just reserved for your stock cabinets and any cabinets that Line 6 lets you add in the future. TBD on that. But then you have to go into the impulse response block, choose your fidelity, and then there they are. You still have your low and high cut parameters, and then mix and level. With the Fractal, it's a different story. If you're at all familiar with cabinet impulses, or if you aren't familiar, the standard file for them is the .wav file. Fractal, for whatever reason, I've yet to see a solid explanation on this, and I would really love to see one, requires you to convert all of your impulses to the .syx file format in order to import, which is, I think it's a proprietary file format that Fractal only uses for this. It's not difficult or anything. You can do it for free, quickly, and easily using their CabLab software. But basically what this means, taking a look at my impulse collection, going in here, I have 2 separate folders that basically contain the exact same impulses, just in different file formats, which is kind of irritating. But otherwise, I mean, you can drag and drop and things into the Fractal as well using their Axe Managed Cabs, and it's still pretty quick and such. But I would be much happier with the AX8 if I was able to use WAV file formats on it. And then another note on the Fractal, taking a look at this list, it's just sort of jumbled. Like, you can see it sort of moves from 1/6 up to here. I'll expand it out real quick. It sort of moves in a growing motion, if that makes any sense, where it goes from smaller cabinets up to larger cabinets, and then a couple bass ones, but then it goes back to 4x12s, and then into your microphone mixes. It's just this it's intimidating when you first open it up. You kind of don't know what you're looking at, and I feel like Fractal could do a much better job. I mean, I don't know what resources are available to them as far as software and hardware goes, but I would love to see like a table where you could organize by cabinet type, speaker type, microphone type. Like if you could put all the Fender Deluxe reverbs together, because like for example, I was going from this 1x12 black SM57 all the way over to number 80, and I mean, it just makes sense to put those together since they are the same cabinet. And you can technically do this through the search function. Like you can group together all the Redwires cabs, there they are, with putting in an RW. But I feel like Since the Helix is such a familiar user interface as far as the cabinet goes, like this is something that most people using modelers are used to, I feel like the Fractal should be trying a little bit harder to make this a comfortable experience for new users. I mean, I found myself like referring to the Fractal wiki quite often in order to decode what everything meant, but now that I've learned it, I feel like it could have gone a whole lot easier. So that's definitely my primary criticism of the Fractal cab block. I think if you're someone who can work with the cabinets on the Helix or work around the cabinets on the Helix, whether that's through importing your own collection of impulse responses or going through an actual cabinet, you should not rule the Helix out quite yet. I'm kind of tired of people, ruling out products or prematurely ruling out products for, trivial reasons, because this really is an issue that can be worked around if you have the resources and if you care enough. And I think there are a lot of features in the Helix that appeal to certain types of players with certain types of complicated rigs, and I will be covering those more in the future. But yeah, I just wouldn't rule out the Helix just because you don't like the stock cabs, because it is something that can be worked around. Next episode of the series will be dedicated to 8 more amp models, since there were a lot of requests for that, and I'm very excited to continue the amp model comparison and even do a couple bass ones. But after that, still open season. I'm still taking requests. I'm probably going to be taking a look at user interface differences, both on the hardware units themselves and their software editors. Also effects. I just got another Hot Rod Deluxe, or I didn't have a Hot Rod Deluxe was my first tube amp, and I sold it a couple of years ago, and now I just got another Hot Rod Deluxe because I missed it. So I'll probably be doing an effects comparison through an actual tube amp, since I saw a couple people request that. Thank you. First of all, I don't know if I've mentioned it yet, but thank you so much to everyone who has supported and criticized and commented on the first episode in the series. Even though I'm not responding to every single person, I'm definitely reading every comment on YouTube, on Facebook, on the forums. It's been so awesome to have this received so well, so critically, to have people talking and discussing. It's been interesting to see the reactions coming from the Fractal community, and then also the Line 6 community, kind of seeing certain people give and take, and then certain other people kind of stick to their guns. It's been very interesting in that regard, and I'm excited to keep it going. I'm very motivated to keep it going with the response so far. And yeah, just let me know what you think. This has been a lot of fun to make, a lot of work to make. The amount of editing and scripting and time and research that goes into this does take time, so I hope you're patient with me. But yeah, that about does it for this. Make sure to subscribe to catch the next parts in the series if you like this, and I'll see you next time.